My parents married me off by force to a wealthy old man at 16, claiming they knew better than I did. I was born into a life of hardship. Not the kind you see in movies where there's still a silver lining. No, this was the kind of struggle where hunger was a familiar guest, where dreams felt like distant illusions, and where survival was the only real goal. My name is Taif, and I grew up in a lower-middle-class Nigerian home where every day was a battle against lack. We lived in a cramped, one-room apartment in the ghetto. The walls were stained with years of struggle, and the leaking roof dripped whenever it rained, forcing us to place buckets all over the room. My father was a roadside mechanic, covered in grease from morning till night, while my mother sold akra in front of our house, her hands permanently darkened from frying. Even with all their hard work, we barely had enough. The little we earned was never sufficient, and most times, it was a choice between paying rent or eating. One night, hunger came knocking again. My younger siblings and I sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the small plate of Gary and groundnuts in front of us. That was all we had. "Mama, won't you eat?" I asked, looking at my mother as she sat beside Papa, her wrapper tied tightly around her chest. She shook her head with a small smile. "I'm not hungry, my dear. You children should eat." Papa grunted in agreement, avoiding my eyes. But I wasn't fooled. I knew they were hungry. I had seen the way Mama had swallowed hard when she was cooking, how her eyes had lingered on the tiny portion before she dished it out. But there wasn't enough, and like always, they had chosen to go to bed hungry so we could eat. I lowered my head and forced myself to eat, but the food had lost its taste. That night, as I lay on the thin mattress on the floor, I vowed to change our lives. Someday, my parents would eat without worrying about tomorrow. School was no different. I attended a public secondary school where classrooms were overcrowded, and we shared torn textbooks that had seen better days. One hot afternoon, our English teacher gave us an assignment to write an essay about our future dreams. I poured my heart onto that paper. I wrote about becoming a doctor, about how I would work hard, make money, and change my family's situation. The next day, our teacher called on me to read my essay aloud. I stood up, my hands gripping the sides of my tattered notebook. "I want to become a doctor because..." A loud scoff interrupted me. "Doctor? With what money?" A boy from the back sneered. The class erupted into laughter. I swallowed, my face burning. Even my teacher smiled a little before regaining his composure. "Let her continue," he said. I continued, my voice shaking but determined. When I finished, there was silence. Then my teacher nodded. "Good job, Taif. But you should also be realistic." That word, realistic, stuck with me. Was it unrealistic for a poor girl to dream? That day, I made another vow. Not only would I prove them wrong, I would make sure they regretted ever doubting me. Growing up, I heard too many times that I was beautiful. I never truly internalized it, but people said it often. Neighbors, teachers, even strangers in the market. But to me, it was just a word. I was more concerned about surviving, about making sure I did well in school, about ensuring I built a future where my family would never go to bed hungry again. But beauty, as I soon learnt, was both a gift and a distraction. By the time I was in SS2, the boys in my school had become a problem. Everywhere I went, they followed. They fought over who would carry my books, who would walk me home, who would get my attention. Some of them were harmless, merely trying to impress me. But others? They made my life difficult. One afternoon, I was walking home with my best friend, Kemi, when we heard footsteps behind us. "Taif, slow down nah," a voice called. I sighed. "Ignore them," I whispered to Kemi, gripping my books tightly. 3 boys caught up with us, their faces lit up with confidence. One of them, a boy from another school who had been pestering me for months, stepped in front of us, blocking our path. "Fine girl, where you day rush go?" He licked his lips, his eyes trailing over me in a way that made my skin crawl. Kemi stepped forward, her voice firm. "Leave us alone." He ignored her, grinning at me. "Taif, why you day always form? You be fine girl? Abi you know like boys?" I clenched my jaw. I said I'm not interested. His smile vanished. "You day do shocker, abi?" He reached out to grab my wrist. Before I could react, a sharp voice rang out. "Taif, go home now." I turned and saw Mama Esther, the elderly woman who sold fruits near our street. She stood with her hands on her hips, her face set in a deep frown. The boys hesitated, then muttered curses under their breath before walking away. As soon as they left, my knees felt weak. "You have to be careful," Mama Esther warned. "Beauty could be a dangerous thing for an innocent girl in this world." I nodded, but I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. The unwanted attention didn't stop at my classmates. Even some of the teachers behaved strangely around me. One in particular, Mr. Akin, our biology teacher, made me uncomfortable. At first it was subtle. He would smile at me a little too long, call me his favorite student, and always found a reason to keep me back after class. One day, after dismissing the class, he looked directly at me. "Taif, wait behind. I need to discuss something with you." I hesitated but obeyed. When the classroom emptied, he leaned against his desk and smiled. "You're very special, Taif," he said, his voice low. "You have a bright future. But a girl like you needs protection. Guidance." I shifted uncomfortably. He placed a hand on my shoulder. My heart raced. Before he could say anything else, the door creaked open. Our principal, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp gaze, walked in. She took one look at the scene before her and frowned. "Taif, go home." I didn't wait. I grabbed my books and practically ran out of the room. That night, I thought about what Mama Esther had said. Beauty could be dangerous for an innocent girl in this world. I was starting to understand. Life had taught me that struggle was normal. But I had no idea something was going to happen that day. It started like an ordinary school day, but by the time the sun set, my entire world had changed. The man who would shape my fate appeared out of nowhere. I didn't see it coming. It was a few months to the elections, and politicians were suddenly interested in people like us. The poor, the forgotten, the ones who lived in places they would never step foot in unless they needed something. That morning, our principal announced that an important guest was coming to donate materials to the school. "The deputy head girl will help distribute the items," she added, her eyes settling on me. I nodded, not thinking much of it. By noon, the whole school gathered as sleek cars drove into our compound. A tall, heavy-set man stepped out of the biggest car, dressed in a flowing white agbada, gold rings flashing on his fingers. He looked important. He smelled of money. I stood beside the head girl, helping to pass out notebooks when I felt someone staring at me. I turned slightly and met the politician's eyes. His gaze lingered, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. I quickly looked away, feeling uneasy. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I was just another girl in a sea of students. I was wrong, because a week later, he found me. I came home from school one evening to find my parents acting strangely. My father's face was unreadable, and my mother's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her wrapper. "Taif, sit," Papa said, his voice stiff. I obeyed, my heart pounding. Something wasn't right. Just then, the door opened, and a man walked in. My stomach dropped. It was the politician from my school. His agbada was even more expensive this time, and his cologne filled the tiny room. He looked around, taking in our cramped living space, the peeling paint, the single ceiling fan that barely worked. I felt exposed. He turned to my father with a smile. "Let's get straight to the point. I want your daughter as my wife." Silence. The words hung in the air like thick smoke. My head snapped toward my parents. "What?" Mama cleared her throat, unable to meet my eyes. "Taif, listen to him." "Listen to what?" "That a man old enough to be my grandfather wanted to marry me? That my parents were considering it?" I turned to my father. "Papa, say something." He exhaled loudly. "Taif, he's offering you a good life. You will go to the best schools. You will never suffer." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "Papa, no. I don't want to marry him. I want to go to university. I want to make something of myself." My father's face hardened. "And what if you fail? What if all your big dreams amount to nothing? This man can take care of you, take care of us. Don't be foolish, Taif." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to my mother. "Mama, please." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "My daughter, we just want the best for you." No, they just wanted the best for themselves. The man, who had been watching me quietly, finally spoke. His voice was smooth, persuasive. "Taif, I will give you everything. Education, money, a better life for your family. Think about it." I stood up, my body shaking. "There is nothing to think about," I said through gritted teeth. "I am not marrying you." I stormed into the tiny space I shared with my siblings and slammed the door shut. That night, I cried until my pillow was soaked. But deep down, I knew the fight had only just begun. For days, the house was tense. My refusal had not been taken lightly. My father barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with thinly veiled anger. My mother's silence was worse. She would just sigh deeply whenever I walked past, like I was a burden she wished she could unload. I was still determined. They could ignore me all they wanted. I would not marry that man. But I underestimated them. I thought love would make my parents listen to me. I didn't know love was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. One evening, as I sat outside watching the sunset, my father called me in. The minute I stepped into the room, I knew something was wrong. My mother was seated on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped together, her face set in a deep frown. My father stood by the window, staring outside as if he was too ashamed to look at me. Then he spoke. "You will marry him, Taif." The words were so final, so certain, it felt like a hammer striking a nail. "No." Papa turned to face me, his eyes dark with something I had never seen before. "Do you think we are giving you a choice?" My hands turned cold. "You can't force me." He let out a humorless laugh. "Can't we?" I turned to Mama. "Mama, please." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. She didn't defend me. I felt the betrayal like a knife twisting in my chest. Papa took a step forward. "Let me make this clear. This is not about you, Taif. This is about all of us. Do you think we enjoy suffering? Do you think we want to struggle for the rest of our lives?" Tears burned my eyes. "I will work hard. I will." "You will what?" He scoffed. "You will go to university, come out, and maybe find a job in 5 years? And in that time, we should continue drinking Gary for dinner? You are the only thing of value this family has, and now, you will do what is required of you." The room started to spin. I had always known we were poor, but I had never realized I was nothing more than a transaction to them. Papa turned to Mama. "Lock the door." My breath caught. "What?" Mama stood slowly, avoiding my gaze as she walked to the door and slid the bolt in place. I rushed forward. "Mama, no. Please don't do this." But she wouldn't look at me. I grabbed her hands, shaking them. "Mama, please, I'm your daughter." She flinched like my touch burned her. Papa's voice was sharp. "Until the wedding, you will not step out of this house. No school, no friends, nothing. You will stay here, and you will do as you're told." I was trapped. Days turned into weeks. I stopped eating. I stopped talking. I would lie on my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was cursed. One afternoon, my elder cousin, Shade, came to visit. I thought she had come to help me, but I was wrong. She sat beside me, her tone gentle. "Taif, stop fighting this." I turned my head away. "I know it's hard," she continued. "But sometimes we don't get to choose our destinies." I clenched my jaw. "Then what's the point of living?" She sighed. "You're lucky. He's rich. He'll take care of you. I don't care about his money." She laughed softly. "You will. One day, when you're sitting in a beautiful house with servants attending to you, you'll wonder why you ever fought this." I shook my head, fresh tears spilling down my face. "I'll never be happy." Shade's voice dropped lower. "Happiness is for those who can afford it, my dear. We survive." Those words broke me. I wasn't born to survive. I was born to live, to dream, to be something. But in that moment, I knew I had lost. The wedding would happen, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The morning of my wedding felt like a funeral. I sat before the mirror, draped in a heavy gold lace gown that wasn't mine. The beaded headpiece dug into my scalp. The layers of makeup felt like a mask, and my heart had been buried long before this day. Everyone around me was celebrating. My mother, dressed in an expensive new lace, looked 10 years younger. My father was outside, proudly welcoming guests as if he had won the lottery. But I sat frozen, staring at my reflection. The girl in the mirror wasn't me. She was someone else. Someone owned. The house was filled with people, relatives, well-wishers, and strangers who only came because there was food. Women bustled around, fixing my jewelry, adjusting my gelly, telling me how lucky I was. "See how fine you look," one woman cooed, touching my cheek. "You're now a big woman," another one said. "Marrying a man of status. Your mates are still hustling in school." I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at the floor, my hands gripping my lap so tightly my nails dug into my skin. Then I felt someone kneel beside me. It was Mama. She took my hands in hers, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Taif, my daughter, don't be sad." I swallowed hard. "How can I not be?" She exhaled shakily. "We did this for you. For all of us." "No, Mama. You did it for yourselves." Her grip tightened. "You will see with time, you will understand. You will have everything you've ever wanted. Everything except my freedom. Everything except my life." A loud ululation from the women outside signaled the arrival of the groom. The politician. My husband-to-be. A man old enough to be my grandfather. A man I did not love. A man I did not choose. The ceremony was grand. Too grand for a girl who had no say in it. The politician arrived in a convoy, stepping out in a flowing white agbada with gold embroidery, his belly round with wealth, his smile full of victory. He walked through the crowd, greeting elders, shaking hands, and then his eyes found me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. He smiled, and the crowd cheered. I felt sick. The ceremony began. I barely heard anything the officiator was saying. My heart was pounding too loudly. My body felt like it wasn't mine. Then came the moment of no return. A velvet box was placed in the politician's hands. He opened it, revealing a massive gold ring. My hands trembled as he reached for them. Taif, my father's voice came from behind me. Lo, a warning. I shut my eyes. Then I felt it, the weight of the ring slipping onto my finger. The moment it was done, the room exploded in cheers. Women danced. Men raised their glasses. Money rained from the sky. Everyone was happy. Everyone except me. I forced myself to breathe. It was over. I was married. And there was no going back. The drive to his mansion felt like a journey to a place I would never return from. I sat in the back seat of a luxury SUV, my body stiff as I listened to the hum of the engine. The politician, my husband, sat beside me, his cologne thick in the air, his fingers drumming lazily on his thigh. He had tried to hold my hand earlier, but I had pulled away, pretending to adjust my bracelet. Now, I just stared out the tinted window, watching as the city lights blurred past, my stomach twisting into knots. This was my life now. There was no going back. When we arrived at his home, or my new prison, my breath caught in my throat. The mansion stood like a palace, surrounded by high walls and security guards in black suits. A massive gold-plated gate slid open as our car approached, revealing a compound big enough to house 3 of the slums I had grown up in. As soon as we stepped out of the car, maids and servants rushed forward, bowing and greeting. Welcome, sir. Welcome, madam. Madam. That word sent chills down my spine. He placed a hand on my lower back, guiding me inside. I flinched, but he didn't notice. The living room was grand, gold chandeliers, Italian furniture, and paintings that probably cost more than my father's entire existence. A staircase curved toward the upper floors, where I imagined his other wives lived. I felt suffocated. Do you like it? His deep voice rumbled beside me. I forced myself to nod. It's beautiful. He chuckled. You'll get used to it. This is your home now. Home. That word felt like a joke. Before I could respond, a woman descended the stairs. She was tall, elegant, and dressed in a flowing silk gown that shimmered under the lights. Her eyes were sharp as they landed on me. I knew who she was before she even opened her mouth. The first wife. She walked straight to her husband, completely ignoring me, and placed a hand on his chest. You're back. The warmth in her voice was forced. He smiled, patting her hand. Yes, my dear. This is Taif. Finally, she turned to me, her gaze sweeping over me like I was an insect. Welcome, she said, her lips curving slightly, but not in kindness. I swallowed hard. Thank you. Her eyes flickered to my ring. I see he has made it official. The tension in the room was thick. I knew at that moment that I was not welcome here. That night, I sat on the edge of the massive bed in my new bedroom, still dressed in my wedding gown. The room was luxurious, decorated with expensive fabrics, a vanity filled with gold-plated perfume bottles, and a walk-in closet full of designer clothes I had never even dreamed of wearing. But all I wanted to do was run. I wrapped my arms around myself, my heart pounding as I stared at the door. I was waiting for him to come in, waiting for the inevitable. But he never did. The door remained closed. Minutes turned into hours. And eventually, exhaustion took over, and I curled into myself on the bed, still in my gown, still feeling like an intruder in my own body. Somewhere in the darkness, I realized something. I felt relief. He had spared me for tonight. But tomorrow was coming. And I wouldn't always be lucky.
A special surprise is coming your way. Subscribe now and turn on post notifications to be the first to know about our exciting giveaway.